President-elect and the former President, and Donald, congratulations. And looking forward to having like I said, smooth transition.
I appreciate it very much. A transition that's so smooth, it'll be as smooth as it can get, and I very much appreciate that, Jim.
You're welcome.
President-elect Donald Trump met with President Biden today at the White House, making a triumphant return to Washington a week after his decisive election victory. The pair exchanged pleasantries and promised a peaceful transition of power. Trump also spoke this morning to House Republicans, where Speaker Mike Johnson dubbed him the comeback king. Here to discuss the latest is Jesse Burns, senior editor here at The Hill. Jesse, Trump and Republicans appear to have full wind at their sails, patting themselves on the back a little bit here in Washington today. When do you think the rubber is going to hit the road?
Day one. The moment that Trump is inaugurated on January 20th, his team is signaling that he will get to work on at least the executive order aspect of his agenda. We understand that he's going to be coming into office with a huge 100-day mission to go after those who are in the country illegally, starting this mass deportation program, to really to execute on the agenda that he campaigned on this entire time. And having these announcements leading up from just a few days after the election to get his team in place, trying to signal to the Senate they want his team to be confirmed ASAP come January, that's going to be really key so that he can implement his agenda very quickly. Now, of course, Trump, one of the big faults going back to his first administration was it took so long to get his cabinet in place, and it took him a long time to actually learn the ropes of government. He's not going to look to make that same mistake twice.
I wonder if there's some fights to be had over some of these cabinet picks, specifically Pete Hegseth, which is his nomination for the Secretary of Defense. He's a decorated veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. He spent about the last decade, though, as a host at Fox News. There's some questions that have been surfacing whether or not he's qualified to lead a department with a budget of $800 billion and almost 3 million employees. Do you see any problems with him getting confirmed?
Well, there's certainly going to be a lot of questions surrounding just his background. Of course, he is really focused on veterans issues. He's been a strong proponent of Trump's America First agenda from outside of the Trump campaign. But he certainly is going to have to face some of those tough questions, not just from Democrats, but also some Republicans who, very much put a focus on defense and defense spending. It's a huge investment, a part of the U.S. Investment every year in the appropriations bills. And so these senators who are going to be voting on him will want to know what is his vision for the department. And they certainly want to give Trump the people that he wants in place, but they also are responsible to their constituents. And there's military bases across the country and hundreds of billions of dollars that are spent on defense spending. And so there's a lot staked on his success, even if he is the one confirmed.
The reaction you've heard from some of the military elite seems to be, who? And I wonder if that's going to be a problem installing or trying to get someone nominated that is an unknown.
Yeah, and we even saw this week with a couple of senators who came out and were a little taken aback, but who is Trump actually putting forward for this? So certainly more of a wild card pick that we've seen so far. But for Trump, personnel is key, and if he values loyalty, he values people who can communicate his message, especially on television, and so he has found that in Pete Hegseth. But certainly there's going to be a lot of scrutiny on him, especially among Democrats, but also among some Republicans.
And apparently he has the look, which is important to the president-elect. I want to ask you about the Department of Government Efficiency. Trump says this is going to be run by Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, both two billionaire entrepreneurs who are Trump supporters. During the campaign, Musk said that he was going to find a way to cut $2 trillion out of the government budget. Is this a real thing? I mean, obviously it's not an actual department. Ultimately, Congress controls the purse strings. How seriously should we take this?
Yeah, it's a really unusual quasi-governmental body, and it's very typical for different presidents to have different flavors in terms of advisory groups, and they want advice from not just within the government formally, but also informally from business leaders, executives across the country. And so Trump certainly wants Musk's input. We've already seen at Mar-a-Lago Musk being involved in conversations with world leaders, being involved in some of the staffing personnel decisions that have gone on, even trying to influence the Senate majority race on Capitol Hill from afar. And so we anticipate that Musk will have influence in government, whether it's an official government agency or not, or more of an advisory committee, which it sounds like this will be. His influence is still going to be felt.
cutting government spending is something we hear Republicans talk a lot about on the campaign trail. Over the last several administrations, it's been more difficult to enact when in office. Do you think that's going to be the case again in this administration? I mean, Republicans control the House and Senate and the presidency. You would think if they wanted to make big cuts, they could. But when you try to make big cuts, constituency groups are often feeling the pain and fight it.
Yeah, and ultimately it'll come down to how much of a resistance can Democrats actually put up in the House and the Senate. Of course, Republicans are going to have majorities in both, but it's a pretty slim majority. It's just a handful of votes in both chambers. And so for Democrats, when it comes to the purse strings, Congress controlling the purse strings, there is going to be obviously a lot of blowback when you try to slash entire aspects of the Department of Education, for example, or huge changes to the Department of Health that RFK Jr. has signaled. That is going to face a buzzsaw in Congress, and potentially, it will be up to lawmakers to really push back on that, and whether there's an appetite among Republicans to push back and try to save some aspects of these federal agencies.
We're still waiting to see who's going to be the nominee for press secretary, or I guess who will pick for press secretary. Caroline Leavitt is seen to be the front runner. She worked in the press office during the first Trump administration. Stephen Chung was kind of the attack dog on the campaign trail. Alina Habba was a lawyer for him in some of the criminal trials, I think, in New York. What do you think his pick will say about his relationship with the media this time around? Obviously, it was a contentious and a bit of a unique situation during the first Trump term. Now, we're coming back to another Trump term. What do you make of what you think his relationship with the media will be?
Well, certainly he has several people who are very media savvy. They have the ability to both represent his views but also push back in media. And so, the names that you floated are all certainly people to keep an eye on. In the first Trump administration, we had a collection of people rotating door. We had Sean Spicer, Kayleigh McEnany, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And for each of them, they all had their different strengths and weaknesses when it came to standing at that lectern. And so I think one thing that you can count on is someone who is going to be able to articulate Trump's message on immigration specifically is going to be a huge hurdle, especially with the blowback that we anticipate on day one if these mass deportations are actually implemented. Someone who can explain his position and also field questions in an articulate way. But certainly Trump values loyalty. Someone who has his ear at all times is going to be the person who will ultimately be in that role.
I want to ask you about this Wall Street Journal report that says that the Trump transition team is this draft executive order that would set up something they're calling a warrior board to evaluate current members of top military brass and could allow the purge of some of these top officials. For those who fear a second Trump term, this is kind of, I think, what they're talking about. How seriously do you take this? Because it is apparently just a draft. And what are you hearing inside Washington about this possible purge of government, of military officials?
Yeah, I think that you have to take it seriously. You have someone in Hegseth, who is now the nominee for defense secretary, who's openly talked about slashing parts of the Department of Defense that just don't make sense and line up with Trump's America First agenda, going after the woke ideology and pushing back on a lot of the initiatives that the Obama, Trump, and Biden administrations even put forward. And so I think you can't rule out the fact that they could go after generals and try to purge generals who played a role in the Afghanistan withdrawal, generals who maybe have spoken out a little bit more on some of these political topics. Of course, Trump famously warred with General Mark Milley, the former Joint Chiefs Staff Chairman. And so, Trump has a very interesting relationship with the military. He refers to them as my generals. He's always talking about, boasting that he has the best generals. At the same time, he realizes that he doesn't want new wars, and the Department of Defense has been in a defensive posture for quite a long time.
I would imagine if he just starts ousting generals that he disagrees politically or for pet issues that he thought they were on the wrong side of it, there would be some pushback within the military and even among Republicans in Congress who have allies in the military.
There are, and definitely, the messaging that we've seen so far is very much trying to turn the department on its head. And what they actually carry out will likely be more conservative than what they've signaled so far, depending on the pushback that they receive. But I think that there will be, these are going to be the questions that are asked when Hegseth goes before the Senate for confirmation hearings. How serious are you about actually implementing some of these major overhauls that you have signaled that you want to do?
I guess that's assuming assuming we have confirmation hearings. There's been this talk of recess appointments.
Recess appointments, right?
Yeah. Jack Smith, the special counsel who's been prosecuting Trump over his actions regarding the 2020 election and handling of classified documents, says he will resign before Trump takes office, essentially ending these cases. There's just a question of whether or not his